Welcome to the TELUS Originals DocTalks, a series of talks dedicated to craft, themes, and ideas behind TELUS Originals documentaries with the people behind and in front of the camera. I'm your host, Sabrina Rani Furminger, and for this episode, we'll be talking to Ben Cox about The Interceptors. The Interceptors documents a diverse group of inspiring individuals who rise up to support food security in British Columbia. They do so by using a groundbreaking app called Vancouver Food Runners that reduces the many barriers to food rescue. As of the film's completion, Vancouver Food Runner volunteers have diverted 1.2 million pounds of food, 1.2 million pounds of food from the landfill or compost, delivering it to the more than 105 organizations in Vancouver that feed marginalized people. It's a remarkable feat that was born of the early days of COVID-19, and its origin story and present are laid out in this beautifully crafted film, which was selected as part of the Story Money Impact Story to Action program. Joining me today to talk about The Interceptors is filmmaker Ben Cox. Ben has built a diverse body of documentary work, making films for organizations like the CBC, National Geographic, Chorus History Channel, and TELUS Originals. Ben produced and shot Tea Creek, a feature-length documentary about Indigenous food sovereignty that was directed by Dene filmmaker Ryan Dickey and premiered at Vancouver's venerable Doxa Documentary Film Festival. Today, we'll talk food rescue and filmmaking with this very busy documentarian. Ben Cox, welcome to TELUS Originals DocTalks.
Hey, it's really great to be here. Excited to talk about the Interceptors with you.
Absolutely. I am so excited. Now, I have to admit, I thought I was up on a lot of terms. I had actually never heard the term food rescue before. And I can't imagine that I'm alone in that. What is food rescue?
Yeah, I think that a really important part of understanding the Interceptors and food rescue and the work that the Vancouver Food Runners, who are the organization we focus on, and also TJ, who is kind of the main character of the Interceptors,
Mm.
is kind of defining food rescue, food surplus. So, food rescue is basically intercepting, to use that term, perfectly good food that would otherwise have gone to landfill.
Mm.
So, across our society, there are places where because of rules around best before dates, where food that an organization, it's perfectly good food, but maybe it's past its best before date, and therefore restaurants don't want to use it because of literally just because they can't, even though it might still be perfectly edible.
Right.
And so food rescue is really finding that food and diverting it away from landfill, because often, sometimes it goes to compost, but in many places there isn't great composting facilities.
Mm.
And so it goes to landfill. And so the food rescue is really taking that food and giving it to someone who can use it to feed people, basically.
Right. And so anytime then that I buy one of those like ugly like they have bins at supermarkets now that are at like if you want to well you can spend a little bit less if you buy like an ugly apple or like an ugly banana. Like that is I guess one form of food rescuing, I would think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like so there are in the interceptor specifically, I think it was a lot of the food surplus that they're intercepting comes from food companies and from wholesalers and restaurants, and kind of commercial food business, commercial and consumer food businesses. But yes, like the ugly fruit and vegetables, I think it's a great it's a great thing that supermarkets are doing, and that really comes from the producers who, because
Mm.
of there's a big focus when you walk into a supermarket, you see all this beautiful, delicious food, and you're excited about it, and because of that, historically, we haven't liked to see those weird vegetables, and like that's a reasonable percentage of the vegetables that we grow. That it's impossible to make everything perfect, and so I think that's been a real push over the last couple of well, I guess over the last decade of changing people's perceptions about that and allowing people to buy those and remove that waste from supermarkets, for example, or from wholesalers who would otherwise have to throw it away because the public wouldn't necessarily want to buy it because it doesn't look perfect.
Honestly, with the way that food prices are right now, I will happily buy an avocado that, doesn't look quote unquote perfect, because it tastes great. Now, how did you become interested in this topic and in this world?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the UK, and back in the UK, I actually did quite a few projects, smaller projects on food waste. Some specifically actually to do with coffee. So like
Mm,
coffee, I won't get too into the weeds with it, but basically, coffee is like one of the most wasteful things that we consume because only a tiny piece of the plant, like basically, so coffee comes as this kind of tiny little, almost like a cherry on a tree, and we
yeah.
pick the cherry, we get rid of the fruit of the fruit part of the cherry, and we just take the bean, and then we grind it up, and then we basically um, brew the coffee, and then all of the coffee grinds go to waste. So we
Mm.
use such a small part of this, and so that's kind of how I got into it because coffee is so wasteful, and we made a couple of films about it, about people trying to use excess coffee products to I don't know, like as a fuel for creating energy, burning it, or even using kind of the kind of fruit from the coffee, which no one really uses or knows about, to make chocolate actually. And kind of so I kind of had this initial interest in food waste, and obviously I knew that it was a big problem. And then the kind of story of Vancouver food runners kind of came across my desk thanks to my wife actually, and I
Ah,
kind of
okay.
got really excited about it. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I was going to ask you how you found out about Vancouver food runners, and I love when it's a spouse who or a partner who, you brings you the idea and was like, "Hey, you got to spend some time in this world. This story needs to be told." Talk to me about Vancouver food runners then. Like how do you describe it to the uninitiated, people who are like, What they run with food? What is happening here?"
Yeah, so Vancouver food runners, yeah, they're absolutely amazing. Run like founded by Tristan Jagger and Michelle Raining, and they're basically like the Uber of food rescue. So they use an app which was originally created in the US actually, and then they licensed, and they were the first people to license it in Canada. And it essentially turns volunteers into Uber drivers who can select a food rescue that they'd like to do, and they're given the pickup location and the amount of food and then the drop off location, and they basically, yeah, divert this food from businesses to people who can use the food all across the community. I don't
Mm.
have the exact numbers, but I think at the moment they work with around. It's grown actually quite a bit since we did the film,
Yeah.
and they work with around 1,500 volunteers who do rescues fairly regularly, and they work with I think around 130 different community partners that they divert the food to. And I'm not 100% sure about how many restaurants actively donate all the time. But yeah, it's a big across Vancouver. It's amazing, and I think updates to the numbers of the amount of food, it's well over £2 million of food that they've rescued
Wow.
in the
That
last
is
3-4
amazing.
years. Yeah, so it's having a really outsized impact, and I think like that's a really interesting part of it, which was kind of what piqued my interest initially, is just the use of technology. Is that like this
Mm.
is such a innovative use of technology that allows Vancouver food runners, so they have a very small core team of about 4 or 5 people, and then they have this network of volunteers, and like through that small team, because of how they're all organized through this app, it just allows them to just have this like hugely outsized impact. And I mean, they are also an incredibly effective team, and
Mm.
you know, just like pulling everything together is just really, really cool to see.
I mean, it's absolutely wonderful, and I'm so glad that your documentary exists because, I mean, I can think of a lot of people in my life who would be, keen to be, part of that, the core of volunteers of Vancouver food runners. I mean, the incentive, what I thought was so powerful though, is that the incentive for people to sign on and to help is really to help. It's about, it is about helping. What and you featured a few of them, in the documentary. What do you think drives, these volunteers to give of themselves in this way? There's one woman you spoke to, had already like, rescued more than 8,000 pounds of food. I'm sure she's far more, she's far ahead by now. It's incredible the work that they're doing.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think it was really cool because I think you know, it really took off. It kind of Vancouver Feeder Runners existed pre-COVID, but then it really
Mhm.
took off in COVID because I think if people had a lot, what some people had felt they had a bit more free time or wanted to give back, but then obviously social distancing made that potentially a little bit more difficult. And so, actually, during COVID, this was a really effective way for people to volunteer and do it in a way that was, you know, safe. So I think Tim, who is one of the volunteers, he is a little bit older and obviously wanted to, you know, protect himself from COVID, so he could, you know, use his pickup truck. I think he actually bought a pickup truck to do more food rescues during COVID
Wow.
because he was doing so much. And some of the stats are like absolutely insane about how much people have rescued, and they'll do one every day, and just like the commitment and the yeah, just the commitment to it is just absolutely amazing. I think in terms of reasons, like there's such a diverse set of reasons. I think people's um but a big piece of it, I think, is people are driven by a um seeing the amount of waste that is created and wanting
Mm.
to address that, and that they just even in their own homes they would see the food wasted, and that they can have, again, this kind of outsized impact by doing this. And I would say another thing is that, especially during that COVID period, what I heard from a lot of people was that it was a sense of community. It was kind of
Mm.
they would go to the restaurants, and you know, when we weren't allowed to have any interactions with each other, they would still get to see the person they were picking the food up from, and then they would get to drop it off at the community partners. And if you're doing that every day, every week, like that real sense of community, and that you're all doing something in this big chain that is having an effect on people's lives, because ultimately most of this food gets used to address food insecurity in the city, and is used by like this incredible network of community partners who are addressing all sorts of, or who are filling gaps for all sorts of people.
I mean, it's really beautiful, because like the name even Vancouver Food Runners, it makes me think of like a relay. The clock starts ticking and then you pick up the food, then you pass it to the community partner, and the community partner prepares it, or to a chef, and then the community partner, it goes to community partner, and then it goes to somebody in the community, who needs it. Like, it's so
Hmm.
powerful. One of the people who you spent time with, you already mentioned already, is TJ, and I believe it was TJ who spoke. Actually, I was not expecting to cry during your documentary, but I did, talking about children who had not ever gone to a restaurant before, and who like were living in that, with not knowing where their food was coming from, not knowing the next time they would eat, and yet here they had the opportunity to to enjoy uh, nourishing, delicious, food on a regular basis because of this chain of people that you're describing. Can you tell us a little bit about TJ? How you met him, and what really struck you, about him and the special qualities he brings to this work.
Yeah. So basically, when I first got introduced to Vancouver Food Runners, I met Chloe Leslie, who was working there at the time. Chloe's just amazing. She was very much in control of like building and creating all of the relationships and organizing the volunteers to get where they needed to go,
Mm.
And basically, I was talking to Chloe and saying like, hey, I'd love to kind of figure out how we make a film about this, and she was like, oh, well, you need to talk to TJ.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, cool, piqued my interest a little bit there. And I was like, okay, who's TJ? And she's one of the people. So they deliver to all of these community partners, but then they also delivered to Chef TJ, who is in his personal free time donating his time to create meals, really delicious meals from all of these incredible fresh ingredients,
Mm.
which are then delivered to community partners so that they don't have to do any of the prep work themselves. It saves them money in ingredients, all of these things. And he's just, and Chloe was like, wow, yeah, he's just amazing. And so I can't remember exactly, like maybe TJ and I had a coffee and I was talking to him, and you're just like, he's such a warm, big-hearted, so full of energy, and I was just like, okay, well, this is the story. I think this is really kind of, this will make the film possible to have this kind of active work of TJ in the film, because yeah, just what he's doing is so inspiring. And so essentially, kind of, every week TJ creates 12. I think it was much more during the pandemic, but kind of he still creates about 1,200 to 1,500 meals a week that then get distributed to people,
Wow.
or again, all over the city. Um, and I think TJ's background, he's from the Philippines, and he had his kind of experience growing up where there was like very much he was very much brought up in his with his grandmother, who was this
Mm.
amazing community leader who had a restaurant and cooked for everyone in their community. And I think that, yeah, TJ just has come and recreated that in Vancouver.
No, I mean, in the film, we actually get to see TJ. I think he was making some kind of soup or something for like 600, like it would be like 600, servings. What were like do you remember what were some of the like the rescued food that you saw, delivered to TJ, and what he was able to create from that? Like, are there any standout or highlights when you look back at that?
You know what? We spent a bit of time that there were some things that didn't quite make the cut, some stories, because I think during like there was just so many amazing stories, particularly from those early days in the pandemic. But it definitely still happens like this. But essentially, um, I think a big thing during the pandemic was like Vancouver is a hub for cruise ships. And so when
Mm.
everything shut down, there was, if you're a cruise ship, you're ordering like, if you're going on a cruise, you're ordering a lot of food all
Right.
at once. And so there was this point at which TJ got a literal truckload of cabbages. And he was, and he, he was like, you know what, we can deal with this. And so they made sauerkraut, they made
Oh, so good.
kimchi, and he just like they had it like packed in their freezer. And I think it took them a couple of days to prep all of this. And just the TJ's an incredibly experienced chef. He has
Mm.
cooked in some of the best hotels in Vancouver. He's done huge banquets, so like he can work at scale. You see like a little bit of that in the film, but like he's incredibly experienced, and so him and his team can kind of solve all of these problems that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily have the capacity to. And so the cabbage is a perfect example. And
Wow.
yeah, like just when he talks about these things, and then like Vancouver food runners, they're also solving some of these huge food problem, food, like not problem, but like Vancouver food runners are also solving problems like this. Sometimes they have like a a warehouse full of kale, or I think in the film Chloe mentions like 7,000 mangoes. But they're able, through their volunteer network and through people like TJ, they're able to deal with these huge volumes of food and take them to where they're needed.
It is obscene, though, to think about the fact that it without, TJ, without Vancouver food runners, people doing that work, like those thousands of mangoes and all of that, cabbage, which is a superfood, by the way, would have just been been left to rot.
Mm.
It is incredibly powerful, to think about the impact, that they're having, but also like the amount of work that is still left to do as well. When you look back at making this film, what are some of the memorable moments that come to mind?
Um, I think a big part, when you're making a film, you're in it, and I think honestly, like when I look back at it, I think a big piece is just how relaxed the whole process was. Honestly, so I worked
Mm,
with producer Mike Johnson at Studio 104, and Mike's an amazing producer, and I think just because of his organization, we were able to really just relax and have a good time on set, and that just like lent to a great environment for everyone, and like made all the contributors really really comfortable.
mm,
I think you touched on it earlier, but there are some quite vulnerable moments for TJ, and I think like I knew going in, I kind of knew where those were going to happen, and the locations and everything, and it just, because of that lack of stress, we were really able to work with the team to support him in being able to be vulnerable and feel
mm.
kind of comfortable in that. I think as well, I think it's all a bit of a sometimes it's all a bit of a blur because you're doing so many different things. But we had some really fun moments. So there's some just on a kind of technical level where we had this scene of TJ riding his bike along the seawall, and so we had to get this kind of side by side camera cart to film him and track him while he's on his bike. And I think we all had a really good time doing that. I think another thing is just also I'm still close with TJ. We've actually done a couple of other projects after this.
Really?
Yeah, and we've actually, because of the partnership that we have with Story Money Impact, but also just because he's done some amazing other things. It's just been really fun to maintain that relationship. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned story money impact. Can you tell us a little bit about what that what that is exactly, and what that involvement, in the film, how it impacted, the work that you did?
Yeah, so Story Money Impact, they, as in the name, they're there. They're an organization that is focused on creating film impact, and I guess the way I describe that is create changing people's perceptions, and also hopefully inspiring people to take action. I guess in the context of the Interceptors, this would be action around food waste.
Mm.
This would be in their personal lives or in at their work. And so, a huge shout out to Sue Bealey and Brianna Girdler, who have really worked with the Interceptors and have just been wonderful advocates for the film. I think that as a filmmaker, I think it's everybody's dream that your film makes impact, right? Like
Mm.
that's why you make documentaries. You want to connect with people. And basically, what Story Impact do is they kind of they take films and they select a number of films every year, and then they do an impact campaign, which is basically a series of screenings where they bring members of the public, but also they focus on like bringing key audience members who are going to create impact to these screenings, or who might be impacted by the film, who they think might
Mm.
be impacted by the film. And so we share the film, and then there is often a panel afterwards that is very focused on the impact goals that you set. So
Mm.
with the Interceptors, it's obviously kind of inspiring people to reduce food waste and to understand that key difference between like food surplus and um, or defining those keywords: food surplus, food rescue.
Mm.
And really, I think it's been a really nice. The film has been this like really cool tool for community action and organization, that it provides this like focal point for people to organize around. And I think
Mm.
like even some of those conversations that creates are really important. We actually did the last in the series of impact screenings. We did this like absolutely incredible event, which happened a couple of months ago, and it basically TJ, because you know, a big thing for TJ is flexing his culinary skills, and that being a very important. You know, he needs to ensure that his team are able to do that and also do the community work at the same time.
Mhm.
And so we kind of, or TJ kind of melded those things together with the support of Story Money Impact, and we did a kind of cocktail event with canapes and like kind of fine dining food, all made from surplus food that would otherwise have gone to the landfill.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it was a fun. It was kind of very much like a fundraiser for TJ's work, at which we kind of showed the film, and I think the event had about 150 people, and it was hosted at Falls Creek Yacht Club. So it's kind of like this very very bougie event, but it was absolutely fantastic, and you know, brought together, I would say, maybe a lot of people who weren't necessarily super aware of the issues, but then at the end, you know, by the end of the night, they have the information they need, and to make action in their own lives, but
Mm.
also to support the work that TJ is doing and Vancouver Food Runners are doing.
That's incredible. That's affecting real change right there, having an impact, as it were. Uh,
Yeah.
but do you consider yourself an activist? You know, especially
Uh,
like if you are making films that are, inspiring change, and you are, working with TJ, screening the film, raising funds. Like and I'm thinking about even myself having watched this film now. Like I feel motivated to, to do more, to be more, cognizant and mindful, of how I interact with food, and that your film did that, is it your intent to affect that kind of change?
Um, yeah, I think so. I think I don't know if I identify 100% as an activist.
Yeah.
I think it's, yeah, it's an interesting thing, and something I love about filmmaking, right, is that you get to dive into a subject, and I wouldn't say, I think that I I have some reservations about identifying as an activist because
Mm.
I don't have all of the information, and like sometimes I do, but I think what is really great is that, and a key part of making impact is that, like, you know, I have some skills as a filmmaker, and I can make a film that kind of creates this emotional reaction in people, and I can understand the topics. But then, like, a key piece of impact is like giving that as a tool to people who can use it in an effective way, who have more of um, a better understanding and can communicate that better. So I think a key piece that like was really interesting learning in the film is that, um, I think the next step, and kind of what Vancouver food runners are focusing on, particularly Michelle Raining, is they're focusing on, you know, what's the next step. So we're addressing food insecurity,
Mm.
but actually, you know, what we really need to be doing is addressing, um, you know, or reducing poverty,
Mm.
and giving people equitable food access.
Mm.
And you know, and something that I think is important to mention in that is that, like, and that was focused on in the event that we held, is that like everybody should be eating this waste food. This shouldn't be used as a food insecurity. This shouldn't just be used to address food insecurity. Like, this needs to be 100% normalized for everyone. And then we also need to be moving away from, um, basically just well, we need to be moving towards creating equitable food access for everyone, where
Mm.
everyone has equal access to delicious nutritious food, um, rather than the kind of potentially, you know, the pre-existing models that we have. um, and I don't want to be too critical of those things. You know, food banks, for example, have provided like a really important, provide a really important service.
You're so curious, you're so interested, you're following so many stories and you're bringing your audience, along with you, to as you're learning more, so are we. What kind of challenges did you face bringing this story to the screen, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Um, Honestly, this isn't a good question because I think the biggest challenge is always funding.
I mean, for
Um,
documentary sphere, that is a huge issue, right? It is the
yeah,
yeah,
and we were very grateful for TELUS coming on board. Honestly,
yeah.
it was really great. I think we really didn't have that many challenges. I think everyone involved was really keen to tell the story, which is such a key part of making a film. Is that especially and that's such a it makes everything really easy in that everyone shares the vision that people need to know about this, and there needs to be a broader understanding of these issues. And so, yeah, I honestly don't think, other than some small technical issues, we really didn't have any issues. We actually made the film. We had a quite short timeline for the film, and we were able to get it out relatively very quickly. I think from um, funding to delivery was probably around 8 months, which
That's such a short amount of time. I mean, because I've
yeah,
spoken to people who they work on their documentaries for 3 years, 4 years.
yeah, a hundred
That's
percent.
incredible.
And that's great. That's a great feeling. And I think, again, with the story money impact, the what's been fantastic is like having that life after it, where it continues to be out in the community and it continues to create impact.
But what was something that you learned about food rescue in Vancouver, through this film that you didn't actually know before?
Um, I think a really key piece, which I think is to give huge credit to Vancouver food runners, is that I I think I had heard about you know people in the past who have done similar things. So the kind of the niche that like Vancouver food runners fills is the of uh small amounts of collecting small amounts of food. So there
Mhm.
are other amazing organizations in Vancouver and across Canada, across the world, who um, they can send a big truck to collect food waste and then divert it and do food rescue, and that's been happening for a long time. What hasn't really had the gap that hasn't really been filled, I think, effectively, is small amounts. So there are hundreds of food businesses across Vancouver, and everyone has food. They all have food waste, and essentially what Vancouver food runners are able to do is they have this kind of 2 box minimum. So as long as you've got 2 boxes of whatever it is, bananas, oranges, they can send a volunteer out to collect it. And
Mm.
I think in the past, people have been, um, I think food businesses have sometimes been let down. And I don't want to, like, this isn't me pointing the finger at anyone at all, but it's like it's hard to maintain a service where you're picking things up. Maybe you don't have a big enough volunteer network, or
Yeah.
it's been a bad it's been a bad day. And so they've signed up to these services, which where they can donate their food, but then the food's been left out on the street, or it hasn't been collected. And what Vancouver food runners have done, or able to do with with the app and the large network of volunteers, is they've been able to, provide consistent service for people.
Mm.
And a huge part of that, which is massive credit to Vancouver food runners, is they built these amazing relationships with food businesses across the city. And that, and another thing is just that, like, so when they don't, sometimes they're not able to get a volunteer there for whatever reason, and the team will go and pick it up themselves. And
Wow.
there's only a couple of them, but they're so committed to maintaining these positive relationships so that people will continue to donate food, that they'll go above and beyond to do it. And that really shows. And they're talking to hundreds of food businesses. They're talking to hundreds of community partners every day, and it was just amazing to see that level of commitment.
That's so powerful. I mean, it really speaks to uh, the essential service that they are providing. They definitely recognize where they are in this chain, in the relay. I'm stuck on relay, I guess, because it's called runners. That's what I'm kind of thinking of. What do you say to business owners who might scoff at food rescue, maybe believing that it's too expensive or too complicated to pursue, or who might even question why it's necessary?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Again, on the technical stuff, I'm not sure 100%. Well, I am sure 100% that it is. I think a big piece for people is the liability issue.
Mm,
So people are worried that they give away food and then they become liable if something goes wrong. And
right.
so there is actually it's law. It's law in BC that businesses are not liable for the food that they donate. So that's actually
Mm,
not an issue. I don't know. You'll have to go and look the specifics up on that, but I can be 100% sure that that is true.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think that um, something that was interesting to learn from Vancouver food runners is that um, when they approach businesses, so they approach lots of food businesses to ask them to donate. And I don't have the up to date numbers on this, but like only I think last year when I was talking to them, like only 2 to 4% of the businesses they approach end up donating food. So there's like this huge amount of food out there that just doesn't get donated. And I think, you know, I want to be very understanding of smaller businesses who maybe don't have the capacity to donate.
Mhm.
But I think, if you could, let's say they've collected, 2.5 million pounds of food over the last 4 years from, 2 to 4% of the kind of food businesses in Vancouver. Like
Wow.
if that number could even get to 10% or
Yeah.
20%, that's a huge amount of food would be, that would be available. So I think that, yeah, I think it's important to be understanding of the limitations that some businesses might have, but I also really want to stress that it's incredibly easy to work with Vancouver food
Mhm.
runners. They're a really effective team, and I think you just go on their website and look at the stats of how much they've collected and who they work with, and yeah, and it's as easy as ordering an Uber.
Yeah, I mean, and wow, what an impact, that a business can have, and also what an impact that, just your everyday citizen who wants to do some good can have. If people
Hmm.
want to get involved in food rescue, what should their first step be? And I'm speaking about individuals in this case, not, business owners, who might have excess food. It's people who watch your documentary and are like, I want to be part of the solution. I want to rescue food.
Yeah, yeah. So I think definitely sign up for the Vancouver Food Runners app.
Yeah.
It's on the App Store. It's on everywhere you can get it on your phone, and it's really simple. It's super intuitive. You can. I think a big part of it, that they always that is a wonderful part of volunteering for Vancouver Food Runners is that. You can fit it into your schedule, right? So,
Mm.
basically, you get a list. You go on the app, and you get a list of food rescues that are happening that day or that week. They depending on often sometimes they have like regular rescues that are donations every Friday, and you can sign up for it. And yeah, I think it just fits into it can fit into your schedule, or you can decide that I have a little bit of time. Maybe I'll just look on the app and see if I can do a rescue today. So it's super easy. I think in terms of food waste as well, like there are definitely some things that you can do in your own life. I think a huge one, which TJ learned a lot from TJ, is having a little bit of tape and a Sharpie in your house next to your fridge that you
Oh.
write the date that you had on it, that you cooked the food and you put it in the fridge, and then you can be aware of like, okay, I should use this first.
That's so
Um,
smart. That is
yeah,
so smart.
and
Yeah.
chefs and people in restaurants do this all the time. I also want to be, it's not always top of mind to do these things,
Yeah.
but I think that's a very effective way to keep track of it, and something that TJ talks about a lot. So yeah, that's a hot tip for reducing food waste in the home.
It's a great hot tip. Um, as I mentioned in my intro, and we've referenced a few times, this is not your first documentary that involves, food waste or food security, food sovereignty. How did this documentary and also the other ones that you've worked on that deal with food, how have they impacted your relationship with food? Food is, I mean, I think about TJ talking about, his grandma, his Lola, and her restaurant, and how, the whole community gathered like in her space. Like food is, it's a wonderful place to talk to people and commune with people. Like it's not just about fuel, it's also can be about community. And I think that's part of mindfulness too with eating, right? And
Hmm.
when you do things
Yeah,
mindfully, you don't waste.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think yeah, over a couple of projects, I've done a subsequent project with TJ around food, and I would say that I just think that okay, so a key thing that I think I have realized during the making of this film is just how undervalued food has been in our society as
Mm.
something that is incredibly important, that we build community around, that nourishes us in all different kinds of ways. So TJ, I think he's referred to as a saint in the film, Saint TJ. And so one of
Mm.
TJ's other projects is, and I think this is something that TJ has not forgotten, right? TJ knows how important food is to society and to health in all sorts of different ways. And so basically, TJ's other project that I'm not going to call a side hustle, but let's imagine something like that. But he basically 2 days a week, TJ has for the last couple of years worked as a chef in a public school in downtown Vancouver, and with partnering
Oh.
with an amazing teacher called Brent Mansfield, they've built what's called this program called Lunch Lab. And so what Lunch Lab does is 2 days a week it teaches the older kids in this primary school to cook and prepare meals for everyone in the school.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, and like so they obviously have help from the chefs who help some of the preparation, so Brent, who is the teacher who helps teach, or the teacher that TJ helps,
Mhm.
is Canada's pretty much. I think he's the only edible education teacher. So they have like elective classes, and what the school have decided to do is create an edible education subject. And
Wow.
so throughout the school, the kids come through and they learn how to grow things and how to harvest things, and they have a community garden at the school, and then they take things from the garden and they prepare those for lunch. And TJ's amazing, so he has integrated surplus food into the lunch program, so a lot of the ingredients will come from surplus that has been rescued by Vancouver food runners. And I think, like, when I say that kind of food is undervalued, I think, yeah, there are quite a few different aspects of that, I think, in terms of nutrition,
Mm.
but also, as you say, the kind of community. So a key piece for TJ and for Brent is that the kids come in together and they have a lunch that they all share, and it creates conversation, it creates a social atmosphere,
Yeah.
and it's just absolutely amazing. And one of the incredible parts of that is that um, Brent describes it. Brent described it to me as kind of positive peer pressure as well, about getting kind of kids to eat
Yep.
different foods. And so
Mhm.
in that environment, maybe at home they don't eat kale,
Mhm.
but at school everybody loves kale. Like,
Yeah.
and it was just amazing to go. We made a little film about Lunch Lab, and I've been to Lunch Lab, and they're just these huge piles of kale on these kids'
Yeah.
plates, and they're literally chanting kale outside the door because they love it so much, and they grow it in the garden.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's actually, and I would say that kind of this thing that TJ's built, and Brent has built, and has actually become kind of a really shining example in Canada for what school food programming can look like.
Mm.
And actually, just at the end of 2024, no, sorry, just at the end of 2023, it was announced that there was no. So initially there has been no national school food program for kids across Canada,
Mhm.
and basically the government announced through advocacy that Brent and TJ were included in, that there would be $1 billion set aside for a national school food program in Canada. And
Wow.
like there's a huge network of people who are advocating for this, but Brent and TJ have been a huge part of showing what's possible in schools.
That's so powerful. My goodness. And it's so funny what you mentioned about the kale, because I remember my daughter at 4 years old didn't want to try kale, didn't want to do it. And yet, they had this incredible kindergarten teacher who's like, "No, we're going to grow a garden. We're going to do potatoes, we're going to do carrots, and kale." And that like transformed the act of caring for it as it grew, and it grows really
Mm,
fast. And then harvesting it and then preparing it, like that, just building that kind of relationship with food, it makes a difference. And it's been 9 years since then, and my daughter is, yeah, they love to cook, they still love kale, so it's that's such visionary work. I want to kind of like change, go on a little bit of a different path for a moment, because I'm so interested in who you are, Ben, as a storyteller. What would you say is a Ben Cox documentary? Like, what needs to be present in a story, in order for you to tell it for the screen?
yeah, I think I've always been really inspired by great character pieces, like
Mm,
character-led documentaries, and I think that's the key. A compassionate individual, and obviously some level of conflict that they're struggling against,
mhm,
but also, not doing. I think solutions-based films are definitely my wheelhouse of, celebrating inspiring individuals and the work that they're doing. And yeah, also, there's going to be an inherent conflict within that, but you're not going to be left down at the end of the film. I think you're going to be left like, wow, we should be doing what this person is doing.
over, like, since the first documentaries that you made, how has your style changed, your storytelling style? Like, is there any big difference between, your first projects and the documentary projects that you're making now?
I think a big thing always is scale.
Mhm.
A huge thing is scale. I came from a background of um, kind of one man band filmmaker, which I absolutely loved, and but it's been interesting to kind of steadily work on bigger projects, and bring other collaborators in who are going to
Mm.
bring a lot to the project, which is great to learn from people. And yeah, I think that the I was actually really, I think, inspired by. I worked a lot when I was younger with a someone called Robert Fritz, who really gave me a really good understanding of story structure.
Mm.
And I think it's been that understanding of kind of how to use conflict resolution within the story structure that has been really helpful for um, always making my films hopefully compelling.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's been like, but then I think that when you make short films, it's often a very simple story structure, and it's
Mhm.
been really interesting to work on bigger projects and start making those stories more complex and highlight, and within that highlighting and exploring the characters and their personalities, and just making the stories kind of richer and more well-rounded.
When you sit down to talk to somebody for a documentary, or even to tell a story just in general, do you have idea of where you wanna go? Or are you just, like, in the moment, like, are you following a thread? Like, is
Yeah,
it fully storyboarded beforehand, I guess is what I'm asking.
yes. I think that I do a fair amount of prep as a filmmaker, and I
Mhm.
will do pre-interviews. And so, for example, with TJ, I will have I we just hung out a bunch before, so I could get
Mhm.
the kind of lay of the land of the story. And I think you're always looking for those emotional moments that will bring out some of that emotion. And so I remember I think that you kind of have an idea in the back of your head about these things that maybe will be great hooks for closing a loop on a story. So, for
Mm.
example, with TJ, a really key piece that I found in the um, prep and in the pre-interview was just this connection with his grandmother, and like
Mm.
his origin story. And then I think it was always like, I think if you spend a bit of time with someone, what the kind of things that are going to pull out that emotion that people really connect with.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways it feels like I feel like I don't want to seem like I'm manipulating them, but then you kind of know that those are going to be the moments in the film that people really really like love and connect with and remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think in our pre-interview, I just remember being like, wow, okay, this is really a beautiful thing for TJ. And I think then there's a kind of question at the end where I ask him about what he thinks his grandmother, who was such a big influence on his life, would think of him now, like would
Such a
think of him
great
now.
question. Yeah.
And so and I think it's a good, as a director, as I kind of said before, it's like it's really good to have a clear idea for me of like those moments that I uh, know where they're going to be a little bit more vulnerable and also might need a little bit more support, and prepping the
Yes.
crew for those moments. And kind of I like to split up. I think it's good for variation, but like as well. But like I kind of like to split up those moments as well, so it's not all in one like super potentially not heavy but like more emotional interview.
Mhm.
And just like prepping the crew. I work with quite a few different people, but I have a few core crew members who are just like I know that they're amazing as well at supporting the individuals that we work with,
Right.
and just prepping them to be like, hey, this is going to be a vulnerable moment, let's make sure that TJ feels as good as he can. And yeah, and so like that. Yeah, and I think that's really key in creating that environment, both for him to feel comfortable sharing those moments, but then also post interview for him to feel welcome by everyone.
Yeah, that trauma-informed approach is so important, and I think it's only really recently that documentarians have and journalists in general have started practicing that, and it's so important for relationships, for trust, and just to be a good person, you know?
Yeah.
Um, Ben, we are coming to the end of our time together today. So I guess for my final question, how would you like people to feel when the end credits are rolling on The Interceptors? What conversations would you like to inspire? What feelings or questions would you like people to be contending with after they've watched your film?
Yeah, I think that ultimately the biggest thing is I think I want people to feel inspired.
Mm,
There's the kind of end line of like, let's make this normal, that people eat and
right.
rescue food. Um, I want them to feel, um, yeah, I think that I guess I don't want people to feel like everything's okay, because
Mm,
it's really not. Like I think some of the, probably the biggest stat is that in Canada, we waste 58% of the food that is produced for Canadians to eat.
Oh, yeah.
And that happens all over the place. Not all of that food can be can be rescued.
Hmm.
Um, but I think I would love people to go away and do a little bit more research about um, the work that's being done that they can support. So whether that's Vancouver food runners, I think specifically in Vancouver, there's an amazing group of people who are advocating for policy change around food called
Yeah.
the Vancouver Food Justice Coalition. I think the city is moving maybe slowly, but they are listening to these advocates and trying to make these policy changes that will make equitable food access more available to people.
Hmm.
Um, I think I I want them to hopefully be talking about how they can reduce food waste in their own lives, because a large percentage of food waste happens in the home that
Hmm.
cannot be intercepted, rescued. But it's easy, I think, to reduce that waste. Yeah, and I also, I think I want them to feel that by there are really two clear ways in which they could support. One is by um, supporting TJ. So TJ has a social enterprise called Reroute, which you can buy meals that are made with surplus food.
Hmm.
And you can just purchase those online at, I think it's reroute.ca. And then also, a big piece is just like you can very easily volunteer with Vancouver Food Runners. It's super accessible, really low barriers to entry. All you need is a phone and a car.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
No worries. Yeah, it was great to be here.
And thank you for listening to and watching the TELUS Originals Doc Talks, and to our guest, Ben Cox. Watch TELUS Originals documentaries at TELUS Optik TV Channel 8 and watch.telusoriginals.com, and follow us at TELUS Originals on Instagram. Doc Talks are a production of TELUS Originals. This episode was produced by Sharon Bradley with technical support by Matt Waterworth. Ken Soy is the production executive for TELUS Originals Doc Talks. Doc Talks are produced on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. The viewpoints expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of TELUS.